event of our new Arnold Saltzman Ambassador Series events. It's named in honor of Ambassador Saltzman, who is with us today, to honor diplomats who have done outstanding service and who have worked for the cause of peace. And today we have two of those with Ambassador Stagno Ugarte, the former Foreign Minister of Costa Rica, and Ambassador Wenaweser, the permanent representative of Liechtenstein today to the United Nations. What brings all of us together today is the International Criminal Court. I thought that there would be no better issue to discuss in a series that focuses on important topics related to peace and security than the International Criminal Court. The International Criminal Court, in a way, is a very old idea. One could trace it back almost to the Greeks, actually, and the notion that, I mean, the kind of accountability that we see as a normal state of affairs in domestic issues should be extended to the world of international relations. So it's a very old idea, but it's a very new institution. In a few months from now, on July 1st of 2002, we'll celebrate the 10th anniversary of that institution. For an institution, 10 years is indeed a very young age. But in those 10 years, a lot has indeed been done. And with Ambassador Stagno Ugarte and with Ambassador Wenaweser, we have two key actors of those first 10 years. The Rome Statute, which provides for the International Criminal Court, creates an assembly of state parties which has specific responsibilities ranging from practical matters like the budget to very important substantive issues, and also important decisions like the appointment of judges, of the prosecutor, or of the deputy prosecutor. So the Assembly of State Parties is an integral component of the ICC, and as such has a very important responsibility in the development of the court. It has had so far 3 presidents, because presidents are appointed for terms of 3 years. The first is the present permanent representative of Jordan to the United Nations, Prince Rad al-Hussein, who couldn't be with us today. But I think we're very privileged to have the next 2 presidents. President Stagno Ugarte, who was in the court from 2005 to 2008, and then President Wenaweser, who is the sitting president of the Assembly of State Parties. So we have with us 2 ambassadors who have not only observed the court over the last 7 years, but who have played an important role in the life of the court. I would mention in particular the role that Ambassador Wenaweser has played recently on one issue that is a very important issue that goes actually beyond the role of the court, which is the issue of aggression and how you define the crime of aggression. The Rome Statute provides that the court will have competence on the crime of aggression once it has been defined. And it's not so easy to define. But that happened at the review conference that took place in Kampala in June 2010. And it's an important issue because, as you may know, the Charter of the United Nations has no definition of the crime of aggression. The Charter of the United Nations provides for the right of self-defense, but the right of self-defense itself, in a way, depends very much on how you define aggression. And so having been able to reach such a definition is important. And Ambassador Wenaweser was the chair of the working group that worked on that particular issue and that eventually allowed the review conference in 2010 to agree on a definition, which now will enter a process of ratification by the state parties. So today we have very important topics to address, and there's one last reason why we should have this meeting today, but to be honest, I didn't foresee that, nor did any, I think, of my distinguished colleagues, is that yesterday the first head of state was brought to The Hague, to the ICC in The Hague. Charles Taylor is in The Hague, but before the Special Court for Sierra Leone, not the International Criminal Court. Yesterday, former President Laurent Gbagbo was brought to The Hague, and he will be presented to the court in a few days. And so that is also an important event in the life of the court. So without further ado, I will ask first Ambassador Stagno Ugarte to, since we will follow the chronological order of the President of the State Assembly, to share in his thoughts on those first 10 years of the court. Then I will ask Ambassador Wenaweser. Then we'll start a conversation and then open up to the room for a discussion. Over to you, Ambassador.
Thank you so much, Jean-Marie. It really is an honor and a pleasure to be with all of you and to be inaugurating this important series and to have another opportunity to, I am certain, to coincide with Christian. We tend to be extremely like-minded, and whenever I am not in the same train of thought as Christian, I think I might be on the wrong side of the track. I know that we are supposed to speak about the first 10 years of the ICC, which is something that obviously is interesting, but I would also like to mostly speak about the future of the ICC. And although I do think that there are a number of issues on which we can certainly be very content with regarding the development of the ICC and its establishment as the first permanent international criminal court, very much different to all of the special courts or special tribunals created by the Security Council or the General Assembly to try specific cases. I would like to focus on what I think is a menu of probable bad news that might be facing the ICC in the coming months and years regarding one particular organ with which the ICC sometimes comes into cooperation or collision, which is the Security Council of the United Nations. Over the first 10 years, basically what I would like to say is that I think the court has obviously established itself as the reference for international criminal justice. Its rules of procedure and evidence are without doubt the most advanced that are out there. The situations that are already on the docket of the ICC, I think, have proven that in a very short time, the ICC has managed to get its work going, although it has at times faced political and financial constraints from the states parties. It has advanced remarkably well in terms of its promise of universality, despite tremendous odds, including under the Bush administration, the concerted attempts to sign bilateral immunity agreements and actually forestall countries from ratifying the Rome Statute. It has, moreover, defined the crime of aggression, which was no small feat. And I would like to join Jean-Marie in congratulating and Christian for the remarkable work that he has done over the, not only as president, current president of the ASP, but also as chairman of the working group on the crime of aggression. But let me turn to what I think is probably one of the ICC's major hurdles looking forward, which is actually based on part of the past. And it's this difficult relationship that exists between the Security Council and the ICC. As you probably are aware, the Security Council has referred two situations to the ICC. None of the two are easy situations. Actually, you could say that they are in many ways poison gifts. The first one was in 2005, the situation in Darfur, on which the Council was extremely slow to actually take action. But it finally did decide to refer the situation of Darfur to the ICC. And it did so in a resolution which I think was in many ways celebrated by many of the states parties, but at the same time, I think we all had some doubts regarding the way that resolution had been drafted. More recently, the Council has referred the situation in Libya. And once again, when you look at the language that the Security Council has used for that referral, you say, well, yes, it's wonderful that the Council has referred another important situation to the ICC, but at the same time, the language used in the Security Council resolution is a bit of a mixed blessing. Now, thanks to those two referrals, a number of indictments have been issued regarding Darfur. The first indictment against a sitting head of state, President al-Bashir of Sudan, but also against people like the current governor of South Kordofan in Sudan, Ahmed Haroun, and the commander, one of the senior commanders of the Janjaweed, Ali Kushayb. And regarding Libya, well, the indictments against the late Colonel Muammar Gaddafi, his heir apparent and son, Saif al-Islam Gaddafi, and the former chief of intelligence, Senussi. Now, to focus exactly as to where I see the troubles that lie out there, is that when you look at these two resolutions, Resolution 1593 in 2005 regarding Sudan and Resolution 1970 in 2011 regarding Libya, you see that after the fact that the Council has referred both situations to the ICC, it has basically done absolutely nothing after that. It basically just passes the present to the ICC and lets the ICC lingering with it with absolutely no support from the Security Council. Both resolutions were adopted under Chapter 7, which means that they are enforcement resolutions, those that apparently have teeth, and that are in principle binding on all member states of the United Nations. Yet, remarkably, what has happened in both cases, Sudan and Libya, is that you have the ICC struggling to actually bring these indictees to The Hague. You have member states of the United Nations that are not fully cooperating in arresting or in surrendering the indictees to the ICC. You actually have a regional organizations like the African Union adopting a resolution at its 13th Summit of Heads of State and Government last year, where it actually calls on all members of the African Union not to cooperate with the ICC in surrendering or in arresting President Bashir of Sudan. You actually have both resolutions calling on the ICC to foot all of the bill regarding any proceedings that are to be initiated regarding Darfur or Libya. The member states or the UN itself is not responsible for contributing not one single dollar or euro or yen to these proceedings. And you might say, well, that's not that important, taking into account that you have 120 plus states parties to the ICC. But what's troubling is that you have sitting states parties that are members of the Security Council introducing language whereby all of the costs of any proceedings regarding Libya or Sudan are going to be footed by the states parties of the ICC alone, and yet in their other condition as states parties of the ICC, when they are sitting in the Assembly of States Parties, they say that they want a zero budget growth for the ICC. So how is it that while they're sitting in the Security Council, they ask for proceedings which would cost $6 to $8 million, but when they're sitting as ASP members, they say we want zero growth? Actually, they're undoing with the right hand what they did with the left. And then you also have the fact that the Council has been extremely silent on, for example, condemning any of the countries that have actually allowed President Bashir to visit them and have failed to arrest and surrender him. And here the Council has been extremely, I would say, complicit, actually, in undoing the mandatory or binding nature of its own resolutions. And unfortunately, the situation or the perception that has arisen is that it is the ICC's weakness and that member states or states parties are not complying with their obligations under the Rome Statute But virtually no one is highlighting the fact that, well, that is true. But more flagrantly so, they're also in violation of their own obligations vis-a-vis the UN Charter and vis-a-vis Chapter 7 resolutions of the UN. So it's not only the credibility and legitimacy of the ICC that's in question, it is, more importantly even, the credibility and legitimacy of Security Council enforcement action under Chapter 7. And the silence of the Council on both instances, to me, is tantamount to the Council actually taking all the teeth away from any Chapter 7 resolutions. What's troubling here is that if the Council is to continue referring situations to the ICC, but actually using ICC referral as a stick to be used when a stick is needed, but then when the carrots are required, to basically just hide the stick and say that the stick is no longer operable, or at least it's operable, but by some people out in The Hague who virtually have no power of enforcement unless the Security Council stands behind it, then probably the people will just wait for the carrots to be shown and for the stick to be hidden and actually not take the ICC with the respect it deserves. When you also factor the fact that the Security Council has created tribunals, which in and of themselves have not operated any better, or probably have operated worse than the ICC, and you can look at the situation with a special court in Sierra Leone, or you could look at the ICTY or the ICTR, or we can even look a bit further, and this is not the Security Council's fault, this is the General Assembly's fault, what is happening with the special court on the Khmer Rouge. You would factor in that the Security Council would probably want to strengthen the ICC, as it's the only permanent institution that can actually do international criminal justice. It's also by far the most cost-effective, since the Council is now so preoccupied about costs. It is by far the most cost-effective. The ICC is cheaper than ICTR. It's cheaper than ICTY. And it is, in the end, one additional option in the menu for Chapter 7 enforcement, although the Council has, as I already explained, used it, I think, somewhat unwisely. Now, something that is perplexing, of course, is that you can obviously falter the Council, but the Council is constituted by states. The Council itself is an abstraction. The Council is not a permanent organ because its configuration changes every year. We have Council elections every October, and you have 5 new member states sitting in, substituting for 5 others, and obviously you have the 5 permanent members. But what's interesting here is that over the past 6 years, when both of these resolutions have been adopted, actually you had a majority of states parties of the Rome Statute sitting in the Council. That majority went anywhere from 8 to 10 states parties. With 8 to 10 members in the Security Council, you actually have the votes either to block action because you don't like a particular paragraph, you don't like a particular sentence, or you don't like a particular resolution, or you even have sufficient votes, if you have 9 or 10, and there is no veto, to actually push for action. And what is surprising is that over the past 6 years, when the states parties of the ICC have had a majority in the Council, we have seen the Council underperforming vis-a-vis its possibility to complement the work of the ICC. And what I see here as a troublesome issue is the fact that due to the countries that were elected this past October, next year, the configuration of the Council will no longer have a majority of ICC states parties. Actually, it will go down to 6. So in fact, non-ICC states parties will be in the majority. So if we couldn't even ensure that the Council performs in complementarity with the ICC when we were in the majority, what can we expect from the Council when actually we're in the minority? So I think that 2012 is going to be in many ways a threshold year, a fork in the road, but I hope for the best future of the ICC, but also for the best future of the Security Council enforcement action under Chapter 7, that the Security Council and the members that sit on the Council actually start thinking more intelligently about the way that the Security Council has to cooperate with the ICC. especially on situations which were initiated by the Security Council. No one is asking here the Security Council to become complicit with the ICC on situations which are either initiated individually by a particular state party of the ICC or initiated by the prosecutor of the ICC. But here we're talking, both Libya and Sudan, about two easy cases because both were initiated by the Security Council. And so I don't want to end on a negative note. What is surprising about human ingenuity is that you can always start over. You can always learn from past mistakes. And I think that despite tremendous odds over the past 10 years, the ICC has always prevailed. And I think that probably what makes me think that in the end, the ICC will prevail, even though the Security Council does not really cooperate with it as we all would expect, is the fact that the ICC and just the principles and purposes that are behind this wonderful construct, which is the Rome Statute, are actually gaining momentum. I myself am not a product of the Rome generation. Christian is. Much tribute has to be paid to all of those that did participate in that landmark 1998 conference in Rome, which gave birth almost as a catharsis moment to the Rome Statute. I myself was totally oblivious to it. I was occupied with other minor irrelevant issues back then. But I must say that in 2002, I became a convert to the ICC and to the Rome Statute. And since then, I have tried to do whatever I can, in whatever capacity I can, to actually embolden and empower the ICC. And since then, I have only seen how the ICC has attracted interest, and in many ways it has overcome all types of odds against tremendous enemies that are out there. So I do think that in the end the ICC will prevail. Over the past 10 years, I think we've seen a record of achievement, a very surprising one. And as long as people like Christian and Prince Zaid and all of you are committed to the ICC and to everything that the Rome Statute is all about, I have no doubt that we will prevail, even if the Security Council, with its teeth or without its teeth, participates in it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I should have mentioned, actually, introducing you, that since you left your position as Foreign Minister of Costa Rica, you're now running a small but very important NGO in New York, which is a Security Council report that does not do any advocacy, just shines the light of transparency on the work of the Security Council. So when you listen to Ambassador Stagno Ugarte, you're listening to someone who is watching the Security Council with very keen eyes, and that's another reason to hope that what he said on the responsibilities of the Security Council when it comes to the ICC and the referrals of the Security Council, I mean, that will not go unnoticed because of organizations like the Security Council report. Now let's turn to Ambassador Wenaweser.
Thank you very much, Jean-Marie. It's a great pleasure to be here, and special pleasure to be here with Bruno. As he has said, we rarely disagree, and I will not disagree with anything that he has said, but I will, I think, address a few other issues while I want to come back to what he has focused on, namely the Security Council, because I do believe it's increasingly important. As Bruno has said, I have been involved in the ICC for long years now. I think that in a way there are two things that stand out in the history of this institution. First, it is a history of unexpected developments at all stages in the history of the ICC. Things happened that nobody would have predicted. And I think that's a very important lesson for the future. I am now spending some time thinking about what's going to happen to the court. I'm the president of the Assembly still for 10 days, so I'm clearly on my way out. And of course, I'm thinking a bit about what I have been able to achieve and what that could possibly mean for the future. But I think an important element in this is also that there is an element of unpredictability. The second is, I think Bruno has said that very clearly, in the end, this idea has always prevailed and it has always prevailed against the odds in a way. Before the Rome conference, most people said, look, this is not going to happen. I mean, it's a nice idea, but you all know how difficult it is. It's not going to happen. And then the Rome Statute was adopted. Then people said, okay, well, it will not enter into force because you noticed that the US and many other powerful countries voted against it. Then the statute entered into force. It entered into force much more rapidly than anyone would have predicted among the optimists. Then people said, well, you know, the membership will be limited to the Costa Ricas and the Liechtensteins and the New Zealands of this world, and it's going to be, you know, a nice country for nice states, but it's not going to be relevant. Well, none of that happened either. You have more and more big and powerful states. All of them took a bit longer to join it, but they're all coming now. Before we went to Kampala, everybody said to me, you will never find an agreement on the crime of aggression because you know how difficult that is. We found an agreement on that, the consensual agreement. And that is something that I think is wonderful about the work that we are doing on the ICC. In the end, this idea has prevailed, and I think in the end it has prevailed on the strength of the treaty, but also on the strength of the vision that is behind it. And I honestly believe that today, clearly, there is a bigger demand for accountability. There is a stronger call for accountability, not just for the crimes covered by the ICC, I think for many other things, and we're seeing that on a daily basis. And I do believe that this has in part to do with the work that we have done here. Only in part, but I think that is an important part of it. So Kofi Annan, I think in 2000 or so, or 2001, talked about the age of accountability coming, and I thought he was relatively visionary in doing that, in saying that, because it took a bit longer. But I think we are at the beginning of that age now, and the ICC is the central part of that. So the times when people could think, well, you know, I'm in such a position of power that nothing ever will happen to me, I will never end up in a court of law. I think these times are over, and people want them to be over. And indeed, the ICC is a very, very big element in this. Now, to just look at the numbers in a way, as far as achievements, we're 119 states now, which is close to 2/3 of the membership of the United Nations. We have continued growing, even at the times when we had active opposition, in particular from the US government, and I think that is a very remarkable number and a very important number. We have now, of course, trials on the way. It took a while for the ICC to get to that stage where people are actually arrested or surrendered to the court and then sit on trial in The Hague. We have that now, and we have the first verdict on the Lubanga case coming up very soon. The court is now conducting active investigations in 7 situations, but it has an impact in many other situations because it has jurisdiction in these places. And these preliminary examinations, as the court calls them, which is the stage prior to a formal investigation, these activities are taking place in all the parts of the world. And you know, of course, that there has been a lot of talk about the Council having investigations only in Africa, which is true, but part of the answer to that is, first of all, most of those investigations were triggered by the states themselves or by the Security Council, as Bruno has pointed out, and also that the court is in fact active in all the regions of the world and does have an impact there. If you look now at the news, we produce a weekly report in our mission, and of course part of what we report on is on the ICC and on developments on international criminal justice. Now, just over the past few days, you have had the transfer of former President Laurent Gbagbo to the ICC, a historic development, I think, in the history of international criminal justice, and also, of course, for the ICC. You have had the arrest of Saif al-Islam Gaddafi, who is indicted by the ICC. You have a court decision in Kenya that obligates the government of Kenya to arrest President Bashir. A very remarkable development that comes after a visit that President Bashir has made to Kenya. Kenya, as you know, is a state party to the Rome Statute, and we all think has a legal obligation to arrest any indictee on its territory. Did not do so in the case of President Bashir, with the argument that the African Union, under the influence, by the way, of people like former, well, not head of state, but the former leader of Libya, Muammar al-Gaddafi, had decided not to cooperate with the ICC. So a Kenyan court has told its own government that it will have to arrest President Bashir, of course, along with any other person indicted by the ICC. So the ICC, pretty much on a daily basis now, is in the news and is obviously an institution that is of the highest possible relevance for what is going on in the world. Now, what are the challenges? I think Bruno has talked at length about the Security Council, and I think it's very important that he did. The role of the Security Council under the Rome Statute has been one of the most controversial aspects of the Rome Statute, of the treaty, since the very beginning. There were states at the Rome Conference that said, we will not vote in favor of the Rome Statute because there is a role given to the Security Council under that treaty. We think that this undermines the independence of the court in a way that we cannot accept and cannot subscribe to, and this is why we will, well, in the most cases, abstain from voting. So from the beginning, this has been one of the bigger problems that we have had. And I very strongly agree with what Bruno has said, that what we have seen recently must make us, in a way, pause and think about this whole area and the role of the Security Council again. When the Darfur referral took place, most states parties celebrated that as a big victory for the ICC. That was at the time when there was still the Bush administration in place that was openly hostile to the ICC, and people thought it was a major achievement to get an abstention from the United States in the Security Council. It turned out, of course, afterwards, that indeed, as Bruno has said, this was a mixed blessing, and perhaps a mixed blessing at best. Because what happened was, not only was there no follow-up action by the Security Council, and by no, I mean no. There was one instance when there was a presidential statement that was initiated, well, by Bruno, because he was the foreign minister of Costa Rica at the time, and Costa Rica said, no, we want a statement from the council that says at least very much the obvious, namely that people have to cooperate with this decision that should be legally binding in the first place. But on all other occasions, the Security Council went to Khartoum and didn't talk about it. They had the terms of reference for the conversations with the Sudanese counterparts did not include the ICC. Now, of course, it is difficult to go to somebody and say, by the way, you have to arrest your head of state. I do understand that, but what kind of message does it send if the body that has initiated the jurisdiction in this case does not even make reference to it? The only conclusion that you can reasonably draw, if you're the government of Sudan, is the Security Council does not care, either anymore or never has in the first place, or is certainly not committed to it, because otherwise they would be raising it. So this is what happened with respect to that referral, and you do know, of course, that it has created enormous political problems for the ICC, that it is at the origin of the campaign against the ICC that was conducted by some within the African Union, and that it has done a lot of damage to the institution. And of course, we still have not had any arrests of anyone who has been indicted in connection with that investigation. Now in Libya is a bit different, I think most would argue. Well, I'm one of them. I think one difference is that on Libya the Security Council agreed unanimously to refer that situation, which again, I think most of us hailed as a big achievement. I think also it was a bit of a mixed blessing for the reasons that Bruno has said, because the resolution not only says, okay, we give jurisdiction to the ICC and you pay for it, we don't, and you is the states parties, so that's us, and we have nothing to do with the decision. It also says, and the jurisdiction does not extend over a certain category of people, namely people that are on the other side of what was then sort of an emerging armed intervention. And that, of course, is problematic for the credibility of the ICC. Also, I mean, I was there on Saturday evening when that resolution was adopted. So you go in, and you know, it's great to see the Russians and the Chinese raise their hands and vote in favor of a referral to the ICC. But then you listen to the explanations of vote, and you think, well, it's actually not that clear that everybody is fully behind this. But that's, you know, that's normal in diplomacy. But still, I mean, here again, in a way, I think the Council has missed a very good moment to say something on the situation in Libya. You have seen, you have probably followed in the news that when Saif al-Islam was arrested, the Libyans said, we actually want to put him on trial in Libya. And then some people thought, well, there's sort of a competition between the ICC and the Libyans, and who gets Saif al-Islam. And I don't think that is the situation, really. The Rome Statute is very clear in this respect. If you are a country that wants to have national proceedings in your national courts, you have in principle primacy, so you do it. But if the court has already become active, then you have to go to the court and to make your case. And you explain to the court, this is why we can, and this is why we want to do it. And this would have been a very good moment for the Security Council to say, we think it's great that Saif al-Islam was arrested and implicitly not killed, and we think it is important that the Libyans now cooperate with the ICC in everything that is to follow. And that would have been a very easy thing to do for the Security Council. The Security Council didn't do it. So I think we as states parties have to think a bit differently in the future about the value of these referrals. And I think the financial part is an important part. Bruno has mentioned it. If you, as a Security Council member, if you want to create a tribunal to potentially put Gaddafi and people from his regime on trial, it costs you anywhere between 40, 60, 80 million dollars a year. This is what the Lebanon tribunal costs. If you send it to the ICC, it costs 7 million euro. So You do not have to pay for the judges, you do not have to pay for the court building, you don't really have to pay for the security. There's a lot of things you don't have to pay for, so you use the existing infrastructure, not to mention the competence and all the rest. You just pay for the cost of the investigation and eventually the trial. So it's justice on the cheap, really, but still, you don't want to pay for it. And I think that's not acceptable. And I think we as states parties shouldn't accept it in the future. And we have, as Bruno has said, we have people in the council now that say, oh, we're sending this to the ICC, and we write in the clause, and by the way, we're not paying for it. And then they're sitting around the table that I'm chairing, the Assembly of States parties, and saying, well, actually, we're not paying for it here either, because we want a zero growth budget. So if you want the $7 million for Libya, you have to cut it elsewhere. It's obviously an irrational position to take. It's not preventing anyone from taking it, though. So I do think we have to look at this in a different way. What are the other challenges? I think one challenge is certainly for the court itself, and I think for the prosecutor's office, perhaps in particular, and that will be to have equitable investigations in the places where you have jurisdiction of the court. We have mentioned Côte d'Ivoire. I think it's great that President Gbagbo is in The Hague. I think it's also important that the ICC investigates crimes that were committed by other people, that were not affiliated by Mr. Gbagbo. I think it's essential for the credibility of the court. I think it's great that the ICC has reacted so rapidly to the creation of jurisdiction in Libya, that they have issued arrest warrants very quickly. It was very important that those arrest warrants were in place when the regime fell. I think it is important that the ICC looks at crimes that were committed by other people, or probably committed by other people, as we speak. And these are only two instances. We have had a similar situation with respect to other investigations, and I do believe that this is a big challenge for the court in the future, and in particular for the next prosecutor that will take office in June 2012. For us, the states parties, I think the biggest challenge is to really own this court in a much different way than we have so far. I wouldn't call it a source of frustration, but it's sometimes a source of almost bewilderment when I deal with the states parties that very often seem to think that their obligation or their job as states parties is to elect the judges and to fight over the budget and to do all these other things that, you know, are important. We need to do them. We are sort of the management arm in that sense of the court, but we're also, in a way, the political arm of the court. And that is, I think, what states parties are not sufficiently aware of. And I think that's the obligation they are not really living up to at this point. It's not enough to be a state party for 10 days a year when we have the assembly meeting, that the one this year will start on the 12th of December. You have to do it every day, because this court is challenged every day. And something happens every day with respect to this court where you can make a difference as a state party. As a member of the UN, that's the most obvious way. Sometimes, you know, maybe you're on the Security Council, maybe you can do something good there. You can do a lot of good in the General Assembly, and you can do a lot of good in other places. And that is what is not happening, or is what is not happening enough. Just give you one example, and that was the controversial flights by the United Nations in Sudan, organized by the EPKO that Jean-Marie used to have, but it was after his tenure. So there were two instances when the UN flew Mr. Haroun, who is now the governor of South Kordofan, on a UN airplane from one place to the other. Now that, of course, does send a strange signal, and I think it sends a misleading signal, because the UN is actually very much committed to the ICC, and the UN is very strongly cooperating with the ICC and is one of the ICC's best partners. And this is why this was a reason for concern to us. But there was only one state that intervened with the UN, and that was France, and then there was an intervention by myself. And you know, people think, wow, that's really a problem, that the UN is flying around people, not to mention, you know, the financial aspects, I think that's secondary here, that are indicted by the International Criminal Court. The UN has a policy of, you know, limiting contacts to what they call essential contacts. Is it an essential contact to say, well, we have to fly this person to a particular place? Well, at least you have to ask the question. And that's fine, you know. I spoke with DPKO and I spoke with OLA, and I think it's important to intervene and just to ask the question, say, look, can you tell me what happened, because it doesn't make sense. But most people don't do it. Most people are just sitting there and thinking, well, this is kind of strange, but they do not make the connection between what happens and their possible role in it. And I hope that we as states parties can fulfill that role in a way that is much stronger than what we have shown so far. And then I have no doubt that then this court will continue to thrive. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, you've put a lot of important issues on the table. I mean, I'll just make one comment on the Darfur referral. I mean, I think the history of it is quite interesting in a way, and because it started with largely with the characterization by then Secretary of State Powell that acts of genocide have been committed in Darfur, according to the United States. But then, what do you do? And so there was a contradiction in the international community on the gravity of the crime and the lack of appetite for doing much about it, which led to the report by a remarkable mind, by Cassese panel, which did what it had to do, saying this is a legal issue. It has to be decided not by a panel, but by a court. And then I think for the members of the Security Council at the time, it was more, as you said, I think, a pressure point in a political strategy than just bringing justice to Darfur. And that raises a question. And for the members of the Council, is justice just a pressure point in a political strategy, or is it justice for justice sake? And I don't think there is any clarity in the Security Council on that on that issue. And when I think it's you who said that during the negotiation of the Rome Statute, I mean, the fact that the Security Council was a part of that statute, including through the possibility of suspending action for a year, I mean, renewable, that recognizes the political nature, in a way, of a prosecutorial policy. And I would want to then to push you, to push both of you a bit on that, because indeed, I mean, in any country, I mean, prosecutorial policy, I mean, there are different systems, different legal systems on how prosecutorial policy is managed. The balance between the independence, just including the independence of the prosecutor, and the fact that it's the arm of the state, the different responses to that, and in my own country, in France, I see there's an evolution on that issue. But when it comes to the international community, and this word community is a very misleading one, because it's not sure that there's a community of values in the sense of a national community. How does one reconcile the notion of an independent prosecutor? I mean, what is the, in a way, the ethical and political basis of the action of a prosecutor? What should be his guiding principles at a time when there is no such thing yet as a truly international community? How do you see that? Sorry. Well, this will be an issue for the next prosecutor. I mean.
Yes, no, without a doubt. I think you've raised some interesting points, Jean-Marie. First of all, I think the Council has always struggled with this issue of the dilemma between peace and justice. And it really has not found, I think, an appropriate course of action. And whenever it's confronted with either peace and justice, unfortunately it becomes a peace or justice scenario, where peace is the predominant party on the table. And you can somehow understand that because, after all, under the UN Charter, the Council has the primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. Justice is not within the alleged mandate of the Council. But when you obviously consider that if there is no justice, peace might not prevail in the end, or that there are ways probably of doing peace and justice concurrently, or at least with some type of time difference, but that it's possible to do so as in a tandem, then you obviously do want to question why the Council has repeatedly, whenever the issue of peace is brought into the equation, has said don't bring justice into the equation, because then all of our peace strategies will come to nil. Those that actually did not want initially Security Council referrals were basically arguing that this type of action would obviously undo the Security Council's possibility to enforce peace and security. But I think that what we have seen in both cases, Sudan and Libya, that has not been the case. And it has certainly not been the case whenever a state party of the ICC has decided to initiate proceedings with the ICC on its own national situation. Has ever an ICC situation actually made things worse? I don't think there's any credible evidence as of yet. I would think that actually it's quite the contrary. Now, you also mentioned Article 16, which is this unfortunate, but all negotiations are like that. Article 16 of the Rome Statute grants the Security Council the possibility to basically tell the ICC hands off for a 12-month period. But there are different interpretations as to how to actually interpret Article 16. And once again, what is a bit unfortunate here is that the Security Council has decided to impose its own interpretation of Article 16 in both referrals, in both Resolution 1593 and 1970. And it had actually interpreted in the way that the Council actually decides whether the ICC can commence or postpone. When I think some of those, I wasn't in Rome, so I could be mistaken, Christian can correct me on this, but I think that some of those that were participating in Rome actually interpret Article 16 as yes, but that is before proceedings begin. Once the proceedings have begun, once the prosecutor has acted and there are indictments and there are arrest warrants or there are trials ongoing, the Council can no longer fidget with the ICC, because the ICC is not a UN organ. Sure, there's Article 103 of the UN Charter, which states that the UN Charter has primacy over everything else. But if you're going to take that track and say that, okay, the UN Charter has primacy over the Rome Statute, which I wouldn't contest, then why doesn't the Council assert Article 103 when you have an African Union resolution saying not to cooperate with the ICC? It would apply then to the African Union Charter as well. So why is it silent on one, but it's aggressive on the other? Double standards. Well, nothing new. Nothing new. Welcome to the Security Council. So I think that, yes, the issue you raise of peace and justice is a very delicate one. But I do think that as we start to see the trials in the ICC continuing, and as we start to see how others, Cambodia, actually don't advance in a way that is consistent with peace and justice, more and more the value and the legitimacy and credibility of the ICC will be strengthened over time. So I don't see the ICC ever becoming, and although this is a man that I have a tremendous respect for, a type of Daniel Lemkin ghost going around the UN halls desperately trying to get people on board to a convention on genocide, which is something he eventually did manage. But I don't think the ICC will ever be that poor ghost of a man who's struggling against tremendous odds to actually get people to listen to him. I think the ICC already has its own voice, and it has the wherewithal to sustain and to continue to prevail over tremendous odds.
Thank you. Christian?
Well, you asked the question on, in a way, what's the approach of the Security Council to justice? I think in some ways you have given the answer yourself. I mean, I can't think of a single case where the Security Council made a decision that was based on a pure concept of justice. I don't think that has ever happened. I don't think that happened with respect to Rwanda. I don't think it happened with respect to Lebanon. I don't think it happened with respect to the referrals. Of course, there's always a political consideration behind it. The Security Council is a political body, so I do not see how that will change, honestly. Unless, of course, you do have what you have said as a real international community of values. Well, that'll take a while. But for the time being, there will always be a political consideration behind it, which is the reason why people had reservations about it. And I think the Security Council has to, and I think especially the states parties on the Security Council have to think about this a bit differently about it, and us outside of the Council with a strong interest in the ICC also have to think about it a bit differently. I think the independence of the prosecutor and also the independence of the judges is a key component of this institution. And we're having a lot of discussions about this right now. It's one of the challenges that we have as the Assembly, the relationship between us, the Assembly, and the court. I don't personally think it's that difficult to strike that balance, to say, well, you're independent in your judicial work, but you're accountable to us on everything that has to do certainly with money and efficiency and so on. The prosecutor is independent. I think whatever people will say about the current prosecutor, few people will say he has not acted independently. And he does not depend on the Security Council, and I think that's an important point to make. If the Security Council creates jurisdiction in Darfur and refers to the situation, the prosecutor can still say, well, I don't see a case. I've examined everything on the merits. I don't have the evidence. I will not open an investigation because I have no evidence that the crimes over which I have jurisdiction have been committed. Nobody told him to indict Bashir. The council had to say, they certainly would have said, don't indict Bashir. So that is not per se a challenge to the independence of the prosecutor. But I think the guidance he has to take, or whoever is in the prosecutor's office, is simply the Rome Statute and is simply the law. And you have to base all your actions and all your decisions on the law, because if you don't do that, then you have lost your entire credibility. And that is the only guidance you can take. Of course, within that larger area of the law, there is still a lot of decisions you have to make, and they relate in particular to what is usually referred to as prosecutorial strategy, which also does include equitable investigations of parties, for example, to a conflict.
It's not a UN institution, it's separate from, but certainly because of the fact that its promise of universality obviously would take it to hopefully have all 193 member states of the UN, and that after all, if all the states are not schizophrenic in the way they act within the UN halls or the way they act within ICC meetings, I think that obviously the ICC has been a tremendous contribution to just the UN's handling of human rights issues, and especially international criminal justice issues as a whole. And it has been a most added addition in light of the, I would say, difficulties that some of the UN established tribunals or special courts are encountering. So the ICC, I think, will be a humbling lesson to actually some of these international tribunals or special courts that were created by the UN, and that, well, most of them predated the ICC, so probably they have some room for error there. But I think it has been a most wonderful and most welcome contribution, and I think it will help that community of values that Jean-Marie was speaking about from coming into fruition sometime soon. It will never be universal, but hopefully we will reach that 2/3 majority. We're very short. And once you do have 2/3 majority in the GA, I think that can have a wonderful spillover effect.
Thank you.
My name is Jim Dingman from Pacifica Radio. Thank you for your determination and energy to keep this afloat. I want to ask two questions. First of all, how do you get beyond the perception in the United States of how this issue gets kicked around politically in domestic politics in America? And I sort of want to ask you to think beyond the normal responses to this, because how do we achieve a understanding in the American public that this is good for the United States? And secondly, how has international opinion in different countries in Europe, for example, respond to the whole idea of an ICC? Have polling been done by your organizations?
Well, I think the relationship between the US and the ICC, of course, is a pretty complex one. The US delegation in Rome was among the most active delegations. I think there is no single delegation that has written as many parts of the Rome Statute as the US delegation has. It has had an enormous influence in shaping the statute, even though at the end it voted against it. And I think you've seen a lot of ups and downs since. And I thought it was interesting to see that you had at one time you had an administration that had really an ideological opposition to this institution more than anything else, and that it was during the second term of that administration that position changed. That it was not just, when the Obama administration took over that a shift in position took place. It was actually before that, because the US came to the conclusion under the second term of George W. Bush that their policy vis-a-vis the ICC was actually counterproductive. Now, how you get from where we are now to I don't know. I think you're suggesting the U.S. joining the Rome Statute. I think that is certainly a matter for a domestic discussion here. I think there is very limited appetite, as far as I can see it right now, in the current Congress to embrace international treaties in general. So I don't think this is a matter that has that much to do with the Rome Statute. It extends to many other treaties where you would, from the outside, think that they're probably easier to accept than the Rome Statute. So I think it does require an internal discussion that should run its course. If people like Bruno and myself and others can assist in that discussion, that is great. And there is certainly, there's certainly no place where I have been invited more often to speak than in the US. So.
And if I could add to that, the position of the U.S. vis-a-vis the Rome Statute is not new in the fact that it's not the ICC that's a standalone institution. After all, it was a U.S. president who probably was the main drafter of the Covenant of the League of Nations, which was the predecessor of the United Nations. And President Wilson just couldn't get it through the U.S. Congress back then. The U.S. took a hell of a long time in getting the Convention on Genocide, which would have seemed a no-brainer. The U.S., I think, has yet to ratify the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which seems like a no-brainer. So the Rome Statute seems like a no-brainer, yes, but it's not the only one. The U.S. has this bizarre tradition of somehow staying behind on some very important pieces of legislation. But I think that the day will come. Maybe in the case of the Rome Statute, it'll take a long time. But eventually, I think that the community of values will be sufficiently strong that either it's my way or the highway.
Hi, I'm Tanya Putnam. I'm an assistant professor of political science here and also a member of the Institute. I wanted, Ambassador Ugarte mentioned Article 98 agreements, and I had a question about those. So I'm sure all of you up there view Article 98 agreements as illegitimate, but I'm wondering whether they're viewed as incompatible in a legal sense with membership in the Rome Statute. And if they are, how are state parties, who I'm sure you're encouraging to be active in all of these processes, financing and otherwise, that have actually signed these, viewed in the kind of internal politics of ICC deliberations?
Well, I think the Article 98 agreements are largely irrelevant. I mean, the legal answer is it would have to be up to the court to decide what the value and the validity of these agreements are. We've never had a situation where that became an issue, so the court has never expressed itself on it. And I guess what I just said is kind of speculation on what the court would say. But what I feel very safe in saying is that in practice, in the legal practice, in the practical work of the ICC, they have been irrelevant. They have, of course, been politically relevant for a while, but that time, I think, is also over, and there is this, well, in our circles anyway, famous quote from Condoleezza Rice that has said, "We have shot ourselves in the foot with the policy of trying to get people to conclude bilateral agreements," which is Article 98 agreements. So I think we're in a different phase now, and I see no relevance for the practical work of the court.
Hi, my name is Victor Casanova. I'm a second-year student here in SIPA, and I would like to know your opinion about the future of the proprio motu investigations in the ICC, as it was the case in Kenya and Cote d'Ivoire. I think that among the most important developments in the role of the prosecutor in the last years.
Well, I think it was very important that we had a case of proprio motu, and also that it came sort of later in the development of the court. So now we have had sort of a full set of the trigger mechanisms. What we haven't had, in a way, is a referral that is not a self-referral. So far, we've had only states referring themselves. So we yet have to have a state that refers something or somebody else's situation, which states are always very, very reluctant to do. So I'm not sure that that's going to happen anytime soon. But I thought it was very important to have that, and also to go through the entire process of that is different, as you know, in a proprio motu case. I would think that it's very, very difficult to say what the next prosecutor will do, or how the next prosecutor will approach this. Ocampo was very cautious to not have his first case as a propria motu case, which I personally think was a good thing to do. Now that you have established that all triggers do exist and that propria motu per se is not a bad thing, I would think that the reluctance is less pronounced now than it was at the beginning. And if you combine that with, an increasing reluctance in, political circles, or you've heard that, for at least from your two panelists today, to have Security Council referrals, then maybe you'll have more of the other.
Would you add anything on? Please.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm John Washburn, the convener of the American NGO Coalition for the International Criminal Court, which is now a program of the Institute for the Study of Human Rights here at Columbia. Our work has to do with a subject that was just raised, which is advocacy for the ICC in the United States. I'd be happy to talk with anyone here who'd like to pursue that further. And in particular, we also do Article 98 agreements, and I'd be happy to discuss those as well. My question has to do with the very valuable focus of this afternoon on the question of the Security Council. It's not, that relationship with the ICC is not often raised as much as it should be in meetings like this, and I want to particularly praise Ambassador Ugarte for raising it, and Ambassador Wenaweser for his very valuable elaborations on the subject. There are two possible options, not fully brought out in the discussion yet, about what either civil society, NGOs could do about this, or which the court itself could do. As Ambassador Wenaweser has reminded us, the referral power of the Security Council does not need to be accepted by the court. The Rome Statute doesn't simply says that the court may take it, makes it clear that that language is precatory, not mandatory, and does not lay out any basis on which the court should or should not reject a referral. Are we reaching a point at which a unfinanced referral accepting certain parties from the Security Council should be rejected by the court on those grounds? And secondly, we have the phenomenon very familiar at the UN, with which I know our distinguished moderator has had his own painful experience in the previous incarnation, where you have countries, the same country, doing different things or doing things without regarded consequences in 3 or 4 different places at the same time, the phenomenon that Ambassador Wenaweser has described. Should it become a priority of international civil society, which, as all 3 of you know, is now very highly organized in support of the ICC, should it be a priority of international civil society to work in capitals, to make governments aware that this tripartite inconsistency is taking place, and to put pressure on them to try to change it?
Thank you, and I want to commend you for the good work that you do vis-a-vis the U.S. government. As to this tripartite inconsistency, I think, yes, it would be most valuable if the international civil society can engage, especially with governments that probably are very keen in highlighting their attachment to human rights, to international criminal justice, and they actually pride themselves in actually being leaders on these issues, but then are probably those that are doing most of the damage vis-a-vis the ICC, the financial implications of Security Council referrals, because we're not talking here that it was Costa Rica while it was on the council. Well, we never had a Security Council referral while we were on the council, but I can tell you that if we had been on the council, we probably would have given some fight vis-a-vis the language that was adopted in either of these 2 resolutions. What's interesting is that you have countries that pride themselves as being almost the birthplaces of human rights or of international justice, that are the ones that are giving the fight on the financial implications of the Libya proceedings in the ICC. And it's also those that sometimes also do what you mentioned in 3 or 4 instances, which are undoing what probably is the agreed course of action either by the UN or by the ICC. And as you know well, the civil society has a way of reaching certain governments, especially those that are most democratic, because of the fact that they are accountable, which I think can do a lot of good. And you also have that wonderful mechanism invented by a former Venezuelan PR, the area formula, whereby you can interact with council members and raise certain issues that you think are of importance. The area formula, unfortunately, is not as frequently employed as we would wish, but it is out there. And I think that with some creativity and some willingness on behalf of future configurations of the council, that is another course of action.
Well, to answer your question, John, I don't think the moment has come for the ICC to reject the jurisdiction. I actually don't see how it can do that legally on the basis of you're not paying for it, so we're not doing it. I don't see that in the statute. But I think there was a time when the referrals were politically useful for the court. And I think it's a new phase now. I do not think that the court needs more Security Council referrals. We've had 2. One was unanimous. It is very important for the symbolism, the political acceptance of the court, that you have those who are not states parties in the Security Council vote in favor of a referral to the ICC. That was important, but we've had that. So we have to look at it differently, and we have to overcome this instinct of gratitude. Oh, we're so grateful that the Russians let us do this, or that the US lets us do this, or whoever lets us do this, the Chinese, all those who are not states parties. No, it's not about that anymore, because we're so grateful. Of course we write in that their nationals do not fall under the jurisdiction of the ICC, just to show how grateful we are, and of course we're paying for it also. No, I mean, that has to be over. And this is how we have to think about it differently, to say now, okay, are you serious about wanting justice? If you are serious about wanting this, then you better show it also in the way you do it. So I think the way to start is to really, where Bruno has said, to say, no, we're not going to write this in anymore. We're not going to say we exempt the nationals, from the jurisdiction. We're not going to say you don't have to pay for it. So if you are serious about justice, then you better show it from the beginning. And then, if that happens, then I bet you money that you have a different political dynamic afterwards as well. And then people will show more ownership than they have been showing so far. And I think that's the way to go, not to say we don't want this anymore. I think we just have to think about the conditions differently.
Thank you so much. My name is Aaron Pangburn. I'm a second-year student here at SIPA. And I was just wondering, in reference to the principle of complementarity, what are the standards the court looks for to allow for a domestic court? Is it more about intent and commitment to justice, or the kind of judicial institutions? And if you could address it in regards to Libya and the negotiations that are going on there, that'd be appreciated. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad you brought the Libya case, because I think it just speaks loads as to actually how false this debate that we're having vis-a-vis who gets to try Saif al-Islam is all about. When you look at the mandate given to the United Nations Support Mission in Libya, one of those is actually to create a situation of rule of law in Libya. And when you look at the latest report of the Secretary General regarding the situation in Libya, it talks about thousands of detainees who are in situations of squalor, who have not yet been charged, who really can't confront a credible judicial system. So how is it that in front of that situation, no matter how base your criteria for complementarity are, there is just by no stretch of the imagination the capability currently in Libya to proceed with a credible, legitimate trial of Saif al-Islam or Senussi. or anybody else for that matter. That is a process that will need construction, not because the National Transitional Council is at fault, but because after 40-some years of that regime, there was no credible judicial system to begin with. So it's not like Libya is going to grow one overnight. That's why this false debate we're having is so bewildering, and why the silence of the Council and the silence of other major powers who are actually being complicit in allowing this debate to go on is frankly so frustrating. So I think that, yeah, the Libya situation just speaks loads as to this. So thank you for raising it up.
Well, yeah, I think it's a very good question. I mean, the standards are, as you probably know, inability or unwillingness. So if you take Libya, well, there is no unwillingness. Okay. So it's a question of ability. And there are certain standards in the Rome Statute that say that, the proceedings have to be independent and impartial. And, well, Bruno has spoken very clearly on this. The legal situation simply is that the Libyans have to explain that to the judges in The Hague. And I think this is what has not come out clearly enough at all, what we have seen in the media reports, that it's not anybody else's decision. Really, legally, it's the decision of the judges. And I very strongly agree with Bruno that it is very telling that not only the Security Council collectively has not said that, but that those who have individually initiated that referral have not made that clear, because they sure must know.
I'm Calvin Oba. I'm a student at the School of General Studies, formerly a very low-level clerical staff member of the Secretariat at the UN. But I was wondering, has there ever been any attempt to have the Security Council request that the General Assembly provide funds or some kind of support when it refers a case to the ICC? I wouldn't know the technicalities or the legal aspects, but I was wondering if there was any attempt to bring in the General Assembly.
Well, the General Assembly doesn't have a role under the Rome Statute. The Security Council does. The General Assembly does not have the competence to refer a situation or to suspend an investigation. What does fall within the competence of the General Assembly, though, are the financial aspects, because that is not the competence of the Security Council. And the current situation is actually quite paradoxical in a way, because you do have a system under which the ICC does reimburse the UN for services provided by the UN, and the UN does provide services to the ICC, and it's not that much, but I think in 2011 the ICC has paid about 800,000 euro to the UN for services rendered. But it is not going in the other direction. It's not working. Because right now the UN is not allowed by us, by the states that are assembled in the General Assembly, to give any money to the ICC, and that is simply because there is, it's legally impossible for the largest contributor to the UN budget to give any money to the ICC. So that's what it comes down to.
Yeah, on the financial side, I can share my own experience when I was running the Department of Peacekeeping Operations, and for instance, we were working with the ICC in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where the Ministry of Justice is extremely weak. And so the peacekeeping operation is expected by the ICC, and had numerous conversations, and very good ones, with the prosecutor to help facilitate the work of the ICC in a country like the DRC. And that does not have an enormous cost, but that does have some costs. And then the question arises when you go to the to the fifth committee of the General Assembly, the committee that looks after the budget. And if you tell that committee that you want to strengthen the mission, and that let's assume that's a theoretical, that's a hypothetical case, but not so hypothetical. If you say I would want to recruit 3 staff to deal with, say, the work of the ICC and the peacekeeping operations, you're most likely to run into trouble there, and that's where the contradiction that both Bruno and Christian have identified is very much in evidence. Is that the same member states which give a task to the ICC will not help then the body of the UN over which they have oversight to be properly resourced to cooperate efficiently with the ICC. Thank God these are not big amounts of money, so there are ways to work around it. But there's a clear limitations to what can be done on the UN side because of the lack of support by member states. And I saw it in the RC.
Mm.
Hi there, my name is Alistair Shaw. I'm a current law school student. Is currently studying an LLM in international criminal law. It's a joint program between Columbia and the University of Amsterdam. I've just got 2 questions to pose to both ambassadors. I'm a great supporter of the work of the ICC, but one of the biggest criticisms, which I'm sure you're aware of, that it has taken 10 years to reach a verdict on any case. Well, hopefully this when the Lubanga verdict will be announced, that's going to be 10 years before a verdict's been reached. This is a criticism that Judge Goldstone, previously of the ICTY, made yesterday at an NYU conference concerning the work of the tribunals. And I was just wondering, how do you think the court should overcome this problem? Because it obviously is chipping away at the credibility of the court's ability to function efficiently. And my second question pertains to the crime of aggression. Now, I know, Ambassador Ugarte, you were quite critical of the Security Council's involvement with the ICC as a whole, and I'm sure you're obviously aware that the Security Council has extra involvement in terms of the jurisdiction over the crime of aggression. And I was wondering if you could kind of elaborate your own views on that issue. Thanks.
Well, let me answer the first one, and I'll defer on crime of aggression because this is the father of the creature, so he has paternity. But I'll fill in anything regarding the Security Council on that. The criticism as to the slowness of the ICC, well, I think, first of all, yes, maybe there is some room for criticism, but after all, this is an institution that was created with a small cohort of states parties that has been growing. That means that the financial base on which it's operating is also due to the limitations of that limited financial base of states parties. It's very different from the international criminal tribunals or the special courts created either by the Security Council or the GA, on which every UN member has to pay no matter where you stand on it. So ICTR and ICTY started basically with the resources that the Security Council or the UN decided to give it, and they were pretty well resourced. Other special courts that have been financed with voluntary contributions at times have had a bit of a difficulty. But even with ICTR and ICTY, which began with the full support of the UN, of the Security Council, they were fully resourced. They were also faulted for being extremely slow. They have been very slow. So I think that when you factor into the fact that the ICC has taken 9 years, but starting from zero, looking for a locale where to actually start, to just sit the judges, have the staff, have the prosecutor, finding desks and chairs and computers. I think when you take that into account, the 9 years actually is, I think, a false number. We should really look at when the court really was in full operational capacity, and then to see maybe how slow it has been. But I do think that now that the court will hopefully begin in having our first verdict, we will see it speeding up its work. And international criminal justice in general has been very slow, everywhere, with the appeals. Actually, one of the major situations confronting the Security Council now is what to do with ICTR and ICTY, because they want to wrap both of them up because they're just too costly. And they have a deadline. They have deadlines. And probably some of these proceedings won't be ending by the time the Security Council wants them to end. So now they're working on something called the International Residual Mechanism to allow for more time for these proceedings to be able to end. So the criticism that applies to the ICC, I accept, but I think there are some caveats. And ICC performance, I think, is a lot better than what you can see in the international criminal tribunals.
Well, thanks for your question. I just found out the Lubanga trial has its own website, lubangatrial.org. The trial was commenced in January 2009. Lubanga was arrested in March 2005, so it's not 10 years. Well, I just gave you the dates. Now that said, I certainly share the concern that proceedings should be more efficient. I hope, and I think that's really a hope shared by and an expectation that we have as states parties, that some of the things that happened and the numbers, the dates that I gave you indicate that a lot of the difficulties occurred during the pre-trial phase before the actual commencement of the trial. That the lessons from those difficulties have really been learned and that we will see more efficient proceedings in the future. I do agree with you that it is important from, certainly from a financial perspective, but more importantly from a due process perspective. And I trust that we will see more efficient proceedings in the future. That said, it does depend, of course, on the charges and on the counts, and some of these trials can be extremely complex. And the Lubanga trial actually should not have been one of those. On the question of the crime of aggression, yes, there is a role for the Security Council in the not in the definition, but in triggering the jurisdiction of the ICC. I think one of the most important achievements of the solution we found in Kampala, though, is that this role of the Security Council is not an exclusive role. So you can have a situation, or in every situation, it is first, the court will first look to the Security Council and see whether the Security Council has said an act of aggression was committed in this situation, which is the precondition for putting anyone on trial for the crime of aggression for individual criminal responsibility. But, and that's the big but, and I think that is the big achievement, if the council does not say so, somebody else can say that. And that somebody else is the pre-trial division within the court itself. So it will be up to the court, in the absence of action by the Security Council, to say, yes, indeed, aggression was committed. And I think that was extremely important to get out of Kampala for the independence of the court.
Please.
My name's Alice Labrie. I'm former U.S. Department of State Foreign Service in Turkey, Oman, Sweden, U.S. mission to the UN under Richard Holbrooke. Just a quick preface. I'm sorry I came late because I was hearing a talk on the EU and some of their criminal courts and so forth, so my due apologies. So my question is, and if it's already been discussed, my apologies, who or what army will enforce the rulings of the International Court?
Well, the ICC does not have a police force. So it will always be the states that execute the arrest warrants. And of course, that's one of the areas where states have not been particularly efficient. But it is up to states, and for states parties, it is an obligation under the Rome Statute to arrest anyone indicted by the ICC. And it can also become an obligation for other states if the action is triggered by the Security Council. So it's only national police forces, or if you will, armies, that that can execute the arrest warrants.
Let me add to that, that at least in the cases of Syria, Sudan and Libya, if the Security Council were serious about the fact that they actually want these situations to be dealt with within the spectrum of international criminal justice, the Security Council could have followed through on both referrals, actually being a bit creative and using a mechanism that exists under the sanctions committees, which are created by the Council, whereby it creates the so-called no-fly, the travel bans, on individuals. One could easily imagine the Security Council following through on its referral of Libya, issuing a posterior resolution indicating that Saif al-Islam and Mr. Senussi are from now on in a travel ban situation, and the same could be done with, why not, the indictees on Sudan. Doing so under a Chapter 7 resolution, as it does with every sanctions committee, every travel ban it has imposed, and whenever a member state of the UN fails to comply with that travel ban, it is in breach. It is in breach of the Security Council. This would really have teeth. So one possibility, and this would be the silent army, is for the Council actually to use the mechanism it uses for terrorists and for people that are on travel bans, and to use it for ICC indictees, especially when it has been the Security Council that has referred the situation.
I have a couple additional questions, if I may, that I would want to ask you. Maybe one is easier for Bruno to answer than for you. Is the political assessment on how the African countries are evolving vis-à-vis the ICC. They were initially one of the strongest supporters. Then we had what you both referred to. You referred also to the decision by a Kenyan court, which is quite an interesting one. But politically, as you assess the mood in the United Nations, how do you see the African countries? And as a sitting ambassador, I don't want you to push you to answer, but that's
no, I can. No, you know,
I'd like it if you do.
No, I don't. I don't mind. You know, it's asked at every other press conference, and I usually have to say something. You know, as you have said, Africans have been instrumental in putting this court together. We have the largest number of states parties today are from Africa. I'm personally convinced, and we will see if I'm right, that you will see a different dynamic within the African Union relatively shortly vis-à-vis the ICC. I think this period of open hostility vis-à-vis the ICC is likely over or close to over. I think we will see a more positive dynamic within the African Union. People have really underestimated the destructive influence that the Libyans have had within the African Union. The negative positions taken by the African Union vis-à-vis the ICC were driven by those states that were not parties of to the ICC and were openly hostile to the ICC. And, you know, ironically, history proved Gaddafi right, that he hated the ICC, and he was indicted by the ICC. But I think that will change. I'm not sure how fast and how dramatically, but I do think we'll see a change. But even before that, I mean, even now, you know, I've dealt with this, I mean, really a lot though during these 3 years, because this was one of the biggest political challenges for the ASP. What I always found very telling is that the higher up you go within the hierarchy of a state, you know, the more critical people become of the ICC. If you work here at the level of ambassadors, yes, there is criticism, but it's usually moderate criticism, and it's informed criticism. And there's actually also a lot of support. That is still the case at the ministerial level. If you go to the head of state level, you have a strong opposition in some places. And guess why that is? That is because President Omar al-Bashir has been indicted by the ICC. Because a lot of these people think, well, if it can happen to him, it could happen to me, and they're not all wrong.
Just to add to that, yes, I agree with everything Christian has said. And instead of faulting individual African countries, although I would fault Libya and Sudan, actually I would fault the AU, because the AU has served as the cover for a minority. And I do think that the dynamics in the AU are going to change. But the cover for the AU doesn't only apply vis-a-vis its uncomfortable relationship vis-a-vis the ICC. It also applies vis-a-vis the UN and the Security Council. The relationship between the AU Peace and Security Council and the UN Security Council is probably at an all-time low. Although you have joint missions or support missions, but relations are quite strange, where you actually have open letters by a former president of South Africa, Thabo Mbeki, blasting the UN on Côte d'Ivoire, and then you have the Secretary General's Chief of Staff countermanding, very appropriately I must say, all about the AU relationship vis-a-vis Côte d'Ivoire and the UN. And then you have a chairperson of the African Commission, Jean Ping, coming out with a extremely lengthy letter, I think a 4-page letter, I think it was a week ago, explaining the AU's position on Libya, trying to explain why the AU actually was on the right side of the equation, although everyone thinks they were on the wrong side of the equation. So the AU, I think, has some issues internally, and it has probably been a bit heavy-handed by a minority that had a different set of values. But that minority is the one that is now losing power. And so probably I join Christian in saying that I think we will see a new dynamic.
One last question, if I may, which is in a way broader than the ICC. It's a relationship between international justice and national ownership of justice. I mean, how do you see ways for the ICC to strengthen the link between its proceedings and the people in the countries that are affected by an ICC process? Because for justice to play its full role, it's very important that the people it benefits identify with it. And that's a problem that not just the ICC, any international court will inevitably face.
So you're not talking about national proceedings, you're talking about making international proceedings understood.
Yes.
Well, I agree with you. I think that's extremely important. And, you know, I mean, I've traveled in some of the situation countries. I've traveled in I think Uganda and Kenya are particularly interesting. If you go to these countries, you have a level of understanding of the ICC that does not elsewhere exist, quite frankly. I mean, I was really, really surprised to hear and to engage with people in those places where the ICC is active, to see how much they know and to what extent that they understand the court. But it is very important, you know, to promote this, and I think outreach by the court is very important. You cannot have a court that sits in The Hague and puts people on trial and is also seen and perceived as serving justice to the people. I think is extremely important. I think in some circumstances that we haven't had yet, and I guess also money permitting, it would be very important and very useful to also have proceedings in situ. That means in the place that is affected, which is possible under the Rome Statute, and would hopefully also help people understand these proceedings better. And it really is not a challenge just for the ICC. It is a challenge for all those courts, from the Rwanda tribunal to the others.
And just one thought on that. We were talking about the financial implications of Libya proceedings and the fact that you had Security Council member states saying the ICC will pay. Well, those same countries that are sitting on the council and will be sitting in the ASP in 10 days, one of the areas they have earmarked to actually have a zero growth budget to make room for eventual Libya proceedings are outreach, which is precisely what you pointed to. ICC has a program of outreach to reach out to the local populations and explain what the ICC is about, what the indictments are about, what the trials are about. But one of the areas that has been specifically targeted is the ICC's capacity to do this outreach.
Thank you so much. I think we all need to congratulate our two speakers for what has been an extremely informative